Hi, my name is Mary Ann Parkhill, and I'm the host for today's webinar. I will be behind the scenes trying to keep things running smoothly. If you have any issues or logistical questions during the webinar, please press the green bar on top of the screen and open a chat window and send a chat to Plum Analytics. That's me. We are leaving time at the end of the webinar for questions. Since we're such a large group, you are all muted. Please use the chat window as I just described to ask questions of our presenters, and at the end of the webinar I will gather those up and ask them of Andrea. With that introduction, I want to introduce Andrea Mahalik, the president and co-founder of Plum Analytics, that's going to talk to us today about open access. Thank you. Andrea?
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. Today what I'm going to be talking about, like Marianne said, is all about supporting open access with metrics and using these metrics to cast a wide net. So when we began the company, my co-founder and I, who is a librarian, we began it so that we were able to tell the story behind research, to be able to really tell that nuanced story so that researchers and those that support them could answer the questions that they couldn't answer before through traditional means. Things like, what impact has my current work had? Things like, how do I go outside of the sciences and be able to tell stories about the work that scholars in the humanities are doing? And other questions like that. What we're going to cover here today, though, is what modern metrics can actually be gathered about scholarly research output, and then a peek behind the curtain of how does this work, with the intent of really going into what does this mean for especially green open access, and how can you all on the phone help out with what we're trying to do and really the opportunity that's in front of us all. So our approach is looking at all of the information that was produced online. So this is a graph of all data of what happens in 60 seconds online. And we've all seen graphs that look like this, and you look at the explosion of people interacting and creating content online, and how to make sense of all of that to talk about real legitimate work around research. Traditionally, journal citations were how scholarly measure was done. All about a journal article who cites other journal articles, hopefully peer-reviewed, and counting those citations gives us things like the journal impact factor. And this, as we all know, this mechanism of counting was established during the 1960s when things moved at the pace of printing. Now, with that huge data exhaust of everything that's happening, there's much more that we can gather and tell. The great news is that technology has finally caught up. We can go and mine for this sort of data and then take it and tie it back to the different artifacts that were produced, the researchers who created them, all of the different places that they're affiliated with. We can use all of this big data to start to tell very, very compelling stories. What we can do is we can make visible what was invisible before and make measurable what has previously been immeasurable. The way we approach this problem or this opportunity is to take all of that data exhaust and to boil it down and to categorize it into five different metrics categories: usage, captures, mentions, social media, and citations. I'm going to very briefly just walk through what we mean by these things. So usage is when someone clicks, views, downloads, or interacts with a piece of research output online. When surveyed, other than citation counts, usage has been the #1 thing that researchers care about their work. So I I produced it, did anyone read it? Did anybody care? The next category of metrics are captures. This is where people have gone online, have gone one step further. They've not only viewed the article, but they've made their intent known that they captured it. They intend to come back to it again. They've done things like bookmark it, favorite it, put it in Mendeley as a reader, email it to a friend. They're watching it. What's unique about this category of metrics is that they can come back and go to it again, so they actually trend. Captures trend nicely with what's going to be cited in the future. So whereas citation counts take time to accrue, captures can happen immediately once it's, once the artifact's available. So they're a good leading indicator to what citations are, a lagging indicator. So they're a nice leading indicator of citations, and research has shown that to be true. Mentions are the third category, and mentions are important because this is where the actual stories are hidden, right? This is when someone has written a blog post about your work or written a Wikipedia article that references it, a book review, it's commented on it. All of these things are mentioned, and not only getting the quantitative, how much is your work mentioned, but also being able to click through and read what those mentions are very important. Social media is the fourth category. Social media is exactly what you would think of, plus ones, tweets, likes. These are the standard things that are happening and are very indicative of the buzz and attention that a particular article is getting, but it's also a really good quantitative measure to be able to say how well is this work being promoted. We often see tweets about research are not necessarily commenting on it, but title the article, link to the article. So although we can get some conversations, it's often quantitatively at least much more better measure of promotion. That measure of promotion is very important as a feedback loop, especially to early career researchers who are looking to get the word out about what they're doing. And finally, the fifth category are citations. And putting citations in context alongside of these other four categories of metrics helps you see the whole story of what's happening, both long-term as well as, what have you done for me lately? So how this all fits and how it comes together is if you look at a timeline from the time a researcher has an idea for their work until we can start to measure and quantify impact. It goes kind of like this. So they start with their idea, they write a blog post, they get a grant, go speak at a conference, and finally they've published their first paper. It can take about 2 to 5 years to go from that idea phase to going through and writing their first peer-reviewed paper in a journal, in this example. But then due to the pace of scholarly publishing, for other people to do their work, to read this article, do their research, write their article, go through peer review, and get published in other journals, by the time you get to critical mass of being able to measure these citations, it can take another 3 to 5 years to gather enough data to do that, which means when you start from when did someone first start working on this idea until when is it measurable, with just citations, it's about 5 to 10 years. However, if you look with what we can do now with modern metrics, as soon as that person blogs about their research, we can count, have people clicked on that blog post, have they tweeted about it, they speak at a conference, they openly share their slides, we can count the slide views from that. If they've created data sets and they're sharing those openly, we can give them credit for what they've shared. And then from the very first time they put their preprint online, we can start to count and measure, has it been downloaded, have people bookmarked and saved it, and all along this whole cycle, we're able to get metrics in near real time about what's happening with their work. So how this all works is it all starts with a seed. It starts with a single thing that a researcher can say, this is a piece of this is my output. And from that seed, we then have technology that can go and gather other seeds about it, other ways to talk about it, and everywhere that it's being talked about, the hope that we will create this beautiful representation of their work, right? Their life's work. The birds are singing, the sun is shining, and we've really been able to say this is all of what is happening around this piece of work, and this is the great thing that it is. So you might ask, well, what are these seeds? So I'll take a particular place and time, and when we started Plum, it really became, we started with a question, which is, what do you consider to be research output? So for a particular scholar, what is your output? And then how do I get to it online? So their output isn't always a journal article. Sometimes it's, a book chapter in a book. Other times it's a video. Sometimes, all these different things, we get to know, what do you consider and how do I get to it online? How can we measure it and find evidence that people are interacting with it? It's important to note that we did not begin with, how do we build tools to drive our, journal subscription business? We're not a publisher. We want to find evidence around all versions of a scholar's work. So here's an example of the type of seeds that we can start with. We can start with just a URL. People say, this is a URL to my work. We can start with nice clean identifiers like a DOI. We can also start with a preprint ID and start from any one of these things, or a repository ID inside of an institutional repository. And from that seed, we can then develop further. So for a particular example, here is an article inside of an institutional repository. And you can see from this article that we start with the URL here, and then we also can see that you can download the article directly from here, as well as there's a link to the the DOI through the DOI resolver. So that's where we start with and what the technology starts with. Then from that, we can gather up all of the different evidence and give this metrics, this description of metrics about the article. So there's a Plum print in the upper left-hand corner, I know I'm right to my left, upper left-hand corner, that is data visualization. So per each category of metrics, uses, captures, mentions, social media, and citations. If there's any of that evidence present, the circles will be larger, and if there is not evidence, it'll be smaller. So there's no score. It's just a very simple visual way to say what is happening here. And then you're able to drill in to the metrics or to the data behind it from there. These metrics can then be embedded directly back into the institutional repository. So how this works is we started in this example with the repository URL. From there, we can use the data mining technology to grab the URL that I had pointed out on that page. And from the URL, we can then expand that, resolve the URL and use our knowledge of how is scholarly work aliased on different URLs per publisher to generate even more URLs that people might be talking about sharing or using this work online. From that URL, we can also extract out the DOI. And the DOI, we can look that up automatically and get a PubMed ID, which gives us a PubMed, a link to how people might talk about it on PubMed. From the PubMed ID, we can get a PubMed Central ID and get the URL that they talk about it there. And this goes on and on and on, and we build a wider and wider net of things that we can use to talk about it. So just in this one example, starting from a repository URL, we can end up with over 20 separate URLs and a couple of different identifiers that we can go and look for mentions, social media, captures, citations, etc., about this particular article. So all of these things together form a net. And this net is what we can go and search, search the data exhaust for references to the article in the hopes of capturing a butterfly, right, and capturing descriptions of the engagement around this particular article. But since we've not only captured the URL where it's published in potentially a toll access publisher, we've captured all of the other ways that you can get to it online. Many of them are in open access. We can hope to capture many butterflies with this net and tell the story about all the places that this work is being interacted with online. So this is a network effect. So this net grows with every customer we add. It grows with every data source we add. So every time we find a new way of gathering data from a particular source, that kind of goes and gives benefits to everything we're already tracking. And what we can do with technology is match and merge all of this together to build an ever bigger net. Right now, we have over 250 customers worldwide with over 1 billion of these contributions of scholarly data, and where it exists. And so, yes, I said 1 billion contributions. This net is big. It's enabling us to tell all kinds of stories from all different places where it's being interacted with. How these metrics support open access is this. So if we're looking at a particular article, and I expand out, well, where is this being used? For this one article, you can see there's downloads coming from 2 different institutional repositories, both a bpress, both bpress as well as an ePrints repository that we're pulling data from. What this is these are green open access sources. This is coming from 2 of the co-authors' repositories. So we're tracking 2 different repositories and pooling that information together. So imagine if every one of these co-authors was putting their work out, making, using their rights to take their copy of it and making it available in their institutional repository in open access, and we're able to mine this data. As we create this wider and wider net, we're telling more and more of the story and the benefit of making this available, and we're able to showcase the value that these sources have. Maybe they're small per each, maybe the downloads are small per individual institutional repository, but if you go across all the co-authors for a particular paper, they start to add up to something significant. Having these metrics that update in real time serve as a feedback loop to researchers. So similar to how the speed limit sign on the side of a road is more effective if it updates and tells you how fast you're going. It will hopefully cause the speeder to change their behavior and say, oh, look, I'm not where I should be. Or the Fitbit that many people wear around their wrist. If you ask them, well, why are you wearing that? What do you hope to accomplish? They say, oh, well, by counting the number of steps I take each day and setting my goal and seeing where I am, I'm hoping it's going to help me stick to my schedule, or maybe if I'm close to hitting my goal, I might go for that walk after dinner that I wouldn't have done normally. And so these feedback loops help change behavior towards what we're trying to do. What we hope to do is make these metrics through through widgets, being able to create that feedback loop wherever researchers are looking at their output. So if you embed these metrics, this Plum print, into an institutional repository, it creates a feedback loop that says, I put this here, I get value out of it, and oh, by the way, since I'm gathering metrics from these open sources, I'm able to see the value in doing this. And how this basically works, I mentioned it a little earlier, is that the Plum print includes the five categories, and then this little visualization, just in its unexpanded form, lives on a page, and when a person hovers over it, they can see the expanded counts and click through for details to see the actual tweets, the actual, mentions that were behind this, visualization. So here's comments from a researcher. So she said, my Plum Analytics profile's been updated and I got lost in the metrics for a while. We said back to her, of course, so did you find anything interesting when looking here? And her response, it was beautiful, right? Really glad I put a preprint copy of a total access paper in the repository. It got a lot of traffic there. This feedback loop of saying, hey, it's worth it to contribute to contribute into the IR and showing that is very important. Here is a quote from Dr. Bruce Herbert, the Director of Scholarly Communications at Texas A&M, and in just 2 months after putting these metrics into their IR, their compliance increased from 6 to 13%. It isn't because they started carrying larger sticks. It's because they gave a carrot, right? They said there's a benefit for putting it in there. Researchers could see that benefit, and it incented the behavior they were trying to get, which was contributing their data, allowing the university to archive it, making it available and accessible. So our collective challenge, if I can be so bold as to put one out there, is to act like we are from Missouri, the show me state, and put the data there to show researchers. We can show them a citation advantage. So study after study after study, and I'm sure if you're going to other Open Access Week events this week, you're hearing about the citation advantage, regardless of discipline, that authors get when they make their work available. We can show that citation advantage. We can show them through their own data, because nothing is better than seeing it work at your department, in your group, for you as a researcher, that the work that I made available is being used more. It's very simple to show them this. The other thing that putting their work, making it available in open access, what it gives is a conversation advantage. Open work is more actively discussed. There's some, recent studies, especially that have come out, talking about work in open access is tweeted about more than work that's not in open access. Not shocking, right? Work that people can get to gets talked about more than work that people can't, but showing them that with their own data is what's so powerful. And then finally, you can show that impact advantage. The true impact, I probably misused the word impact earlier on in this talk, but now I'm talking about real impact. Who has your work gotten to? How many people has it reached? Being able to show that is a very, very powerful thing. I'm going to talk about two graphs here that come from, in this case, they're coming from our PlumX dashboards product that lets you look at metrics by publication year. And in this case, what I'm showing is I'm showing 4 of the different categories of metrics. Social media in blue, yellow is mentions, purple is captures where they're saving it to come back later, and finally red is citations. And some of it showing, open access leading to citations, it's tough because you'll notice that here in more recent years, the number of citations are lower. And this particular graph is across an entire institution's output of all their scholars. And graphs have the same trend. The red line, which is citations, for what's happened in recent years is much lower than previous years because the pace of scholarly communications, the citations just haven't caught up. But these other types of metrics can fill in the blanks, and you can see they are measurable much earlier than the citations themselves are. They don't have that same lagging quality. The second graph on the bottom is being able to give that insight to your researchers themselves. So this is, random selection of names, probably changed to protect the innocent, but looking at captures, which I mentioned before, are those leading indicators, and being able to look for a particular department or group or topic area, who is, what work is getting captured the most, and being able to use this to look inside and learn more about what's working and what isn't. The way that the PlumX suite works is that dashboards are the ones that give those kind of by person and by area graphs, whereas metrics are the core data, the core measurements that you can add to an institutional repository. And metrics are something that can be, PlumX metrics are something that can kind of stand alone or be kind of on the outside of the rest of the suite. So steps that you can do is to put these modern metrics in the hands of researchers, whether PlumX or any other way that you can get this data to show researchers what's happening. If we can give them data about their own work to create that feedback loop, it will show the advantage of open access, and it can help us identify. The other big thing that I personally ask of folks listening here is to help us identify other open collections of data that you'd like to see us incorporate. So I wanted to hop out of PowerPoint briefly before I open it up for questions and show you the example that I walked through in the presentation. So here I am going to search for the researcher. And I know it is his lab's work. So let me go up to the lab. And select the article, which I believe was this one. And from here, this is what I was showing kind of in a static way of being able to click in and see the different counts coming from the different places. We can look here not only to look at the output of a particular article, but like I was showing for a particular researcher, for the lab that they're affiliated with, and other, and by department at any level of the hierarchy where trying to show this makes sense. You can see across a particular institutional repository. So here, University of Manitoba uses DSpace just to cause me a harder time in demoing here. It's called MSpace, but this is their DSpace repository. And here, just by mapping data across here and looking at a particular institutional repository, you can do things like very quickly and easily say, let me look at by social media and drill in there and see what articles in my institutional repository are getting the most, pick your measure, getting the most tweets in this case. So I can go through and then very much come in and say, wow, this is interesting. Let me go does this researcher even know that this work is being talked about this way? And they're finding out about this through our institutional repository and helping tie that feedback loop and coming all the way together with that. The other thing that, you can show, and this, again, it looks similar regardless of collection that you look at, is when you look at the analytics, and if I filter this to only show citations, this decline, and this is something that you see, even as the number of artifacts, such as this dotted line, goes up, the number of citations go off. And using these other metrics, so if you're trying to tell someone what they've done in the past past 18 months and measure that and show the benefit of OA, you want to do that. And Marianne, I think what I'm going to do for a moment is pause for questions and see if people have anything in particular they'd like me to go into, or kind of show how it all works.
Okay. We have a couple of questions, not a lot, so I encourage anybody to go ahead and use the chat window or the Q&A window to ask me a question, and we'll ask Andrea. But I did have a question about the seed that when you went through the seed identifier, and the question was, do you need a DOI? I know you don't need to start there, but does a DOI need to be in the chain somewhere in order for this to all work?
It actually doesn't. That's a great question, and it's something that people, of course, if there is a DOI for this research artifact, all the better, right? Because it's something that's mostly persistent. You're going to be able to resolve it and get there most of the time, and it's better. But certain types of research output will never have a DOI, and you do not need one with PlumX in order to really go and start that process. And even as you start tracking a preprint, say, that may not have a DOI, depending on where you put your preprint, some do, some don't, but it doesn't have a DOI, our technology makes attempts to then later, when we do find evidence of this being the same article, merging the metrics, that match and merge process, to merge something that early on did not have one but later does, we can combine those together. Because even though in a purest sense, where the preprint and the published article are not the same thing, most times to a researcher, they think of it as one body of work, that they really want to be able to tell all different versions of that, what's going on with it and what are people saying.
So you kind of answered the next question, but I'm going to ask it just to make sure that the person that asked it recognizes it. You talked about the seed ID and how it expands. Does this happen once when you first place the research into PlumX, or is it continually monitored to see if this research is showing up with different URLs or different IDs in different places?
Now, that's actually a really interesting question. It is happening all the time. So when someone goes through, and let me just pretend to do it here. Let me pick a random site, and I am logged in as a super admin, but I will not press. I promise not to add it for real. So if someone was manually updating a profile, and you don't have to manual, Georgia Southern in this case actually uses bpress in order to auto-populate their profiles for their researchers. But in the case where you are adding a researcher, and say you come in here, and yes, here, so you can see the only way that this was populated in this case was we've associated the link to their bpress author profile with the PlumX profile, and it kind of mirrors it. But say that they came in and they added a brand new DOI to claim, or something on archive, a preprint that they wanted to claim. It will go and automatically, at the moment they press send, match it to everything we know already about that we've tracked about that artifact. And then it starts an entire process where we go and say, you know, like just like that graph I walked through, the technology goes, okay, this is the seed I started with. What do I know? What else can I find out? What are the other kind of seeds that I can collect, and then merge the data together? And that doesn't just happen once. What happens then is, because we're not just collecting metadata about the articles, we're actually collecting metrics, and they update all the time. We then go and recrawl and repoll and reparse periodically, and that frequency depends upon the source that we're gathering the metrics from and the type of identifier it is. So some of our sources we can crawl at a certain pace, and others we get the data streaming at us in real time, so we'll know immediately.
Okay, Andrea, we're getting lots of questions now. And one of them is like, I want to see more demo. So we'll get back to demo in a minute or two, but I wanted to clear off some of these questions first. Is PlumX accessible through institutional contract, or can individual researchers subscribe to PlumX?
Right now, it's just through institutional subscriptions, either for PlumX metrics, which is just embedding metrics in your institutional repository, or for a full view of a dashboard that's organized however you want to organize the data. And then there's additional ways, institutional ways, that if you want to track your grants, in addition to just the researcher's output, but want to track it based grant by grant, then you can layer that in as well. But it's all geared towards an institution and helping tell their story.
Okay, thank you. I have a very practical question, says this questioner. We already use Google Analytics on our website, although this obviously has a far broader reach. How easy is it for the two systems to work alongside each other?
It actually works quite well. If you think of, for your website, and by website, I'm assuming they mean their institutional repository website, or maybe they mean their website where they talk about their research. I'm not sure which, so I'll answer both. So one of the things that you might use Google Analytics for is saying, well, how much has this particular page been accessed? So it's possible to take those Google Analytics reports and then use that as a source of data coming into PlumX. So when we work with getting any kind of usage data, we want to be able to take it however it's being captured on the other end and pull it in. So there's a variety of different ways you can do that. Google Analytics is one way. The other thing that people sometimes use is, so if I look at Autism Speaks is a funder who uses Plum Analytics. And one of the things that they do is they have a website that talks about the research that the researchers they fund have produced. So what they do is that they take these, and let me see if I can find one easily, nothing like going off. There we go. Good guess, Andrea. I'm saying going off script. So in this case, they have a blog post on their side that they're treating as a piece of research, and then we're able to gather information about that they're not going to get through their Google Analytics. So the Google Analytics is saying, how is this performing on my website? But it's not saying, how is the world interacting with this that's on my website? So that's where we're getting all of the other things that are happening around, for example, here are all the tweets that are happening around this blog post about the research.
All right. Can you talk about how you gain access to all the usage data? For example, Twitter, database providers, other proprietary providers. So it's kind of a mixed bag of stuff in that question because it's all a little different, I know.
Sure. So if you go to plumanalytics.com, which is our, external website, and from there, say, learn about metrics, you can see all of the metrics that we gather across the all the providers that fit into each one of the categories. So if I look at usage, for example, it will list the different places we get usage data from. And each one of these, as you might imagine, we get them in a little bit of a different way. So EBSCO is the parent company of Plum Analytics. From them, we get a huge data load every day about tens of millions of artifacts that were accessed the previous day, and all sorts of information about how many times has it been downloaded, how many times has it maybe not on EBSCO host but clicked and linked out on some other source, how many times has the abstract been viewed, etc. Other places, like we have an agreement with OCLC for their WorldCat, which is a way that we support books, which books are not the same as articles, and you can't use the same sorts of metrics. So we use the number of libraries that hold the book as a proxy for usage of a book, and from that we use their API, their programming interface, to have our two systems talk for all of the different ISBNs and OCLC numbers we track. We can then go and query it. For things like Twitter, so some amount of Twitter data is open. If you use their open free API, you can get a sampled part of the fire hose of all of those tweets happening every second. Because research is, if you told a particular researcher, oh, I'm sorry, your research wasn't a part of the sample Twitter decided to give us that day, they wouldn't be very happy that we missed those tweets. So we license Twitter data directly from Twitter so that we can get access to the full fire hose of domains that we consider would likely have a scholarly tweet about them. So everything that's in Crossref, every, IR that we know the domain of, and then our customers also help us add things that are unique to them for us to gather tweets ongoing for their domains. So it really, really varies as far as how we get the data.
Good. This question, I think, goes back to when you were showing the form with the different IDs in it. But the question here is, who populates this form? The researcher, the library, a technical person? So I think some implementation question here.
Sure. Some customers never, ever, ever see that form at all. And they have the source and record of what they consider the outputs of their researchers to be in some systems, whether it's a CRIS system, a current researcher identification, wow, I just lost the acronym, but a CRIS system, whether it's from a homegrown database, whether we even have some customers who have a special library catalog that they just catalog their researchers' output. Or some are in Excel that they're managing and maintaining themselves. So if there's any source of record for that, we can use that. Others are migrating towards things like ORCID. So if someone has an ORCID ID, we can get a list of ORCIDs of their researchers. We populate that in one time, and then as a researcher updates and keeps their ORCID up to date, Plum automatically each day goes out and pulls that information in and stores it. Some customers have none of that, and they're the ones who use the web-based form. So it really depends on what you have in place and the type of information you want to capture and analyze and measure.
Good.
Did I answer that, Marianne?
Yeah, I think so. I just chatted with someone who wanted the question to see if it did. So, boy, things are coming in like, wow. Anyway, like trying to manage it. Okay, Can you show an example of how this might integrate with an institutional repository, or does this serve as the repository? I feel like we've answered this, but I don't know, maybe we need to...
I didn't actually go all the way full circle, so let's do that. So where was I? I was, if I could spell, I knew I was spelling that wrong. I could click on the link that I had on the other page, but that would be too easy. Oh, because I'm at plumanalytics.com. Thank you, Google, for helping me out. So that's actually, so if I'm looking at a particular artifact, one of the things that you can do when you're looking at article level metrics is to say, I'd like to embed this widget. And if I click to embed the widget, it's going to then take me to a wizard that helps me see what this will look like when I embed it. So if I want, this is what I was describing with hand puppets earlier, where there's the plum print, and when you hover over it, it shows details, and then you can click to see more. Some of the integrations have used exactly that. Other times, people want to integrate the metrics along the sidebar, either on the left or right-hand side of their website or along the bottom, say, of the page. Other times, they want the full, the full metrics on a page where you can then click to see for details about it. So once you know exactly how you want it to look, there's two snippets of text that you basically copy and paste into your institutional repository, and the only amount that you need to get a programmer involved is to copy and paste that in, but then to pass in either some identifier. Here, this is showing an example where you're using a DOI. For an institutional repository, you want to handle things that don't have a DOI, of course. So what typically you would do is use the repository URL, and in this case, it will do, and it'll populate that and help you fill out the form that way. So if I go back to the artifact page and look at it on the University of Manitoba's site, you'll see that they have chosen to put the full metrics on their page. Others, if I look at the University of Rhode Island, and let me find an article here, and I look at their site, then they're going to have it in, in this kind of flavor where it's just the plum print, and you can hover over and see what's happening. I know you said you had other questions, Marianne.
Yeah, well, we're getting questions about gaming, which we always get, right? So specifically, this one is, how do you guarantee the quality of usage data? Which of your sources are counter-compliant? Things like Google Analytics, Bitly, Facebook wouldn't be guaranteed against gaming, correct? So that's the question that's written.
Right. I don't think any metric can be guaranteed against gaming, right? Citations can't be guaranteed against gaming. There's all sorts of ways to game metrics. We rely a little upon the sources that we are gathering the data from to eliminate the gaming on their side. We then also look at the metrics that we receive for a particular artifact, and are they out of line? Is there, for example, extremely high Google +1 counts versus the other sources of metrics? Our systems automatically detect these kind of oddities, and then we will go, a human still at this point goes and says, yep, these are not appropriate, and will, not that they've been necessarily gamed, but some purpose, someone purposely went in to do that, but you can get false, like things that don't trend with other things from a variety of reasons. And that's a part of how we're representing it. We also always strive to make the data be able to go and introspect as much as possible what is behind the count. So as you're looking at, you know, let's find an example here with some tweets, because I think that was what was the example asked about. Being able to actually go and see the tweets themselves, click through, see who was tweeting it, and look to see, do these, you know, the data is there to look at, and it is able to be checked out as much as you can.
Were you done with that answer?
Yes, I am. I think.
I thought I interrupted you.
No. There's always a lot you can say on that topic, and it's not, there is no easy answer, because oftentimes there's a very gray line as to what are you actually gaming, and where is it a researcher legitimately talking about and promoting their own work on social media, which is appropriate, right? So it's not a black and white sort of topic.
Right. Has any research been done to show any correlation between the new social media measures and traditional citations? That is, does something like a high number of likes also receive a high number of traditional citations?
There's been, yeah, because the social media is relatively new, right? It's a relatively new field for people doing research. There's all kinds of studies that go on and say what correlates, what doesn't, in what field, you know, in what discipline, how. There's the ones that we believe kind of make intuitive sense, as well as the research is kind of backing up, are the capture metrics, right? The metrics around, are people exporting and saving it? Are they putting it as a reader on Mendeley? Are they bookmarking it? And those studies are pretty consistent that people saving research correlates well with them later citing it. Other things like usage may or may not correlate with citation, because usage can come from many different sources, right? It could be an article that's getting used by the public a lot, but they're never going to be the people who cite it. It really depends upon the type of article. So that's one of, like, it's almost a philosophical thing, if you will, about why we don't try to have just a single measure or a single score about an article, because we really do believe each one of these categories tells a different type of thing and gives a different sort of lens into what's happening.
All right. Is there any way for the alternative metric measures to distinguish between different kinds of buzz? For instance, best thing since sliced bread versus this isn't the paper worth it's printed on?
Yeah, it's tough, because often social media, when you look at if you look at Twitter, for example, it's not quite as common as a gaming question, but it's close, which is sentiment analysis of tweets, right? That's usually something people ask about. And from the analysis we've done of what do tweets typically look like when mentioning a scholarly paper, many, many, many of them are title of the article and a link to it, which isn't bad, or reading this. It's people sharing what they've read. There's not a whole lot of context there. And so trying to do a wide-scale analysis of it, the data is often too sparse to be useful. However, being able to look at a particular researcher's output and then look at what's happening there often is very insightful. So an example is, and I won't, I will purposely, and you'll see why in a moment, not pull up the researcher in question, but he was a leading scholar at his university, and he was the author of many books in his area of study. And he was one of the very first people that were profiled at this institution. So we were looking through their data with them, and we realized, so for books, we provide many different measures. So we provide, you know, the library holdings, we look at ratings and reviews, we are, you know, we have different Wikipedia mentions, et cetera. But in this case, we were looking at all of his reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, and it was, the general area was economics. So they were books that were getting some popular appeal, so it was a decent place to be looking for metrics. And every single one of those had like a 1-star rating and really bad comments. And this researcher may or may not have been aware, but he needs to be, right? He needs to be a part of that conversation and that dialogue, and at least know it's being said about his work. And we didn't drill in, of course, to see, you know, was this a colleague of his making, you know, bad remarks about his work that was unjust? That's not our job. But it was making that aware, making you see the conversations behind it. But we wouldn't say, you know, thumbs down on this guy. That's, not, again, not our job.
This may be our last question, and so I apologize to anyone with the questions we haven't gotten to. We've gotten through almost all of them. But Andrea, what role do you foresee for alternative metrics in the evaluation of the research output of universities?
I see it as a great way to be able to tell that more complete story about impact. So when you're only looking at citations to evaluate work, you're introducing many biases. One, you're not looking at current work. Two, you're not looking necessarily fairly across multiple disciplines who have different citation patterns, and they may not, depending on what citation index you're using, those disciplines, their journals may not even be covered in that metric. So you need a way to look beyond that, and not necessarily in a directly quantitative way of giving a score based on it, but more importantly, being able to tell a more nuanced story and show things like societal impact of the work that's happening and non-traditional work products and all of these things. That really opens up the institution at looking at a scholar's whole body of work and understanding it better than they can through a simplistic single number measure.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and thank you for all of our attendees for your attention and your interesting questions, and we hope this was valuable.
Yes, thank you, everyone.